The sun had barely risen over the far edge of the desert when Ethan McGraw, the quiet rancher who lived miles from the nearest town, stepped out into the chilly morning air and sensed immediately that the day was unlike any other he had lived through in his 37 years of life. The wind was too still, the silence too deep, and even his horses kept lifting their heads as if listening to a warning carried by the land itself. Yet Ethan ignored the unsettling feeling, because survival on the frontier didn't allow a man the luxury of fear, especially not a man living alone on a ranch that took all his strength to maintain. He had just finished checking the water troughs when he noticed shapes moving slowly across the horizon, two figures, unusually tall, walking side by side, leaning slightly on long wooden staffs decorated with feathers and beads, their shadows stretching behind them like long pillars across the red morning dust. At first Ethan thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, because no ordinary travelers walked with such towering height or such solemn, deliberate grace, but as they came closer he could see clearly that they were two Apache women, giant sisters, easily a foot taller than any woman he had ever seen, wearing traditional buckskin clothing fringed with beads and symbols, their hair braided with eagle feathers, their faces painted with markings that spoke of loss and survival. They looked exhausted, like they had walked through the night without rest. Ethan felt his heartbeat slow with caution, because this land had long been a place of uneasy tension between settlers and the Apache people, and encounters could turn dangerous in seconds. But something about the women, perhaps the heaviness in their eyes, perhaps the way they scanned the sky as though expecting danger, made him step toward them rather than away. When they reached the fence line, the older sister, massive in stature, her shoulders broad like a warrior, leaned slightly on her staff, and said in a voice, deep yet faint from fatigue, "We seek no fight, rancher. We ask only for food and water for our journey." Ethan hesitated only a moment before nodding. Whatever these women had endured, they did not come as enemies. He guided them toward the shade near the barn, fetched bread, dried meat, and a pot of beans left from the night before, setting everything on a wooden crate. The giant sisters sat with gratitude written in every gesture, eating slowly, carefully, as though conserving strength. Ethan noticed bruises on the younger sister's arms and a broken arrow tip lodged in her satchel, and though he asked no questions, a part of him knew they were fleeing something. After eating, the younger sister, a remarkably tall, graceful woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, said softly, "You have helped us when others would not. Remember this, kindness is never unseen by the land." Ethan didn't understand what she meant, but he offered them water, filled their canteens, and even gave them a small bag of provisions. Before leaving, the older sister pressed her hand briefly to his chest, just over his heart, and whispered, "You showed respect. The Apache never forget respect." With that, the two women continued their journey into the thickening heat of the day, walking side by side like silent guardians fading into the vast expanse of the wild. Ethan watched until they disappeared, then shrugged off the strange encounter and returned to his chores, unaware that by sunrise the next morning, his entire life would change. That night the wind returned, howling through the ranch like a restless spirit trying to deliver a message. The horses were uneasy, pacing in their corral, and Ethan sensed something stirring in the distance, something big enough that even the land felt tense beneath his boots. Just before dawn, as the first pale rays of sunlight stretched across the horizon, Ethan stepped outside his cabin and froze. In every direction, stretching out like a dark, endless sea, were Apache warriors. Not 10, not 50, hundreds. At least 700 warriors stood silently around his ranch, their ponies stamping at the dust, their spears glinting in the rising sun, their painted faces unreadable. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. 700 warriors gathering around a lone rancher usually meant one thing: judgment, retribution, death. Ethan lifted his hands slowly, not in surrender but in the universal gesture of a man who wished no harm. A tall warrior at the front rode forward, broad-shouldered, wearing a full ceremonial headdress, his presence radiating authority and wrath as fierce as the sun. The warriors behind him remained silent, their formation tight and disciplined, surrounding the ranch so completely that not even a rabbit could have escaped. Ethan's mouth went dry. He understood instantly that the two sisters he had helped were no ordinary travelers. They were important, deeply important, perhaps members of a powerful Apache clan, and now he stood in the center of a gathering that could decide his fate in a single heartbeat. The war chief halted his horse only a few feet from Ethan, his expression carved from stone. "You fed them," he said, not a question but a statement heavy with meaning. Ethan swallowed. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "They were hungry, tired. Anyone would have done the same." The chief's eyes narrowed. "No," he said. "Most would not." Murmur rippled through the warriors, like a wave of approval or remembrance. Ethan couldn't tell which. The chief continued, "Those two women are the daughters of our fallen leader. They fled from enemies who hunted them. You gave them food when others would have turned them away or captured them." Ethan's heart dropped. He had not known. He had simply done what seemed right. The chief dismounted, standing eye to eye with Ethan, two men from two worlds, bound by the fragile thread of one act of kindness. "The Apache do not forget respect," the chief said again, echoing the elder sister's words. "Today we came not as enemies." Ethan exhaled shakily, the weight of the moment sinking into his bones. Why are you here?" he asked carefully. The chief stepped back and raised his voice so the entire valley seemed to echo with his words. "To honor the man who honored our blood." At once, hundreds of warriors lifted their spears in the air, not in attack but in salute, their synchronized movement sending a thunderous rustle across the plain. Ethan stood speechless, overwhelmed by the realization that the sisters he had helped had brought him the respect of an entire nation. The chief placed a beaded necklace over Ethan's head, a mark of protection, and said, "Your ranch is now under the guardianship of the Apache. No enemy, no outlaw, no sickness of men will touch this land without facing us first." And just like that, everything Ethan knew about the frontier shifted. The land was still dangerous, still wild, but now, because of one simple act of compassion, he was no longer standing alone. As the warriors prepared to depart, the chief paused once more. "The land watches," he said. "Remember that, rancher." When the 700 warriors rode away, leaving only silence and dust behind, Ethan understood that his life had changed forever, and this was only the beginning. Subscribe now, because Chapter 2 will reveal what happened when the enemies who hunted the sisters finally arrived at Ethan's ranch, and how one man stood in the middle of a war he never asked for. The morning after the 700 Apache warriors vanished into the horizon, leaving behind only the whisper of hooves and the drifting dust of their departure, Ethan McGraw felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest, not fear, not confusion, but the dawning realization that the simple act of giving food to two exhausted sisters had tied his fate to something far greater than himself. All day he replayed the moment the war chief placed the beaded necklace around his neck, telling him that his ranch was now under Apache protection. And though Ethan tried to return to his daily chores, mending fences, feeding the horses, checking the creek line, his mind hovered, like a restless eagle circling above a valley that knew a storm was coming. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the land in blood-red glow, Ethan suddenly heard hoofbeats, not many, just two, and when he stepped outside, he saw the giant sisters riding toward his ranch again, though this time, their faces carried urgency instead of exhaustion. The older sister dismounted with a heavy thud, her massive frame casting a long shadow across the ground, and said in a grave voice, "Rancher, the ones who chased us, they have crossed into this valley." Ethan's stomach tightened. He had suspected trouble was coming, but hearing it from her lips made the danger feel suddenly real. The younger sister explained, her voice low and sharp, "They are not Apache. They are bounty hunters, men who profit from war, men who follow blood like wolves." She pointed to the northern ridge where, in the distance, a faint column of smoke rose into the sky. "They burned a trader's camp at dawn. They are close." Ethan felt a cold shiver move down his spine. Men like that didn't negotiate, didn't listen, didn't forgive. They killed for coin and reputation, and if they discovered the sisters had stopped at his ranch, they would assume Ethan was aiding them. Yet even with fear stirring inside him, he stood straight. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "As long as I'm breathing." The older sister's stern expression softened for the first time. "You have a warrior's heart even if you were not born into a tribe," she said. But the younger sister shook her head slightly. A good heart is not armor, she warned. Still, Ethan led them inside, gave them water, and helped treat a fresh wound on the younger sister's arm. As he tied a strip of cloth around her injury, she held his gaze and said quietly, "They will come tonight. Wolves hunt best in darkness." And she was right. Night fell heavy and fast, the stars veiled by dark clouds that seemed to crawl like hungry spirits across the sky. And the silence of the valley turned unnatural. Too tight, too still, too watchful. Ethan loaded his rifle, lit one lantern, and stood by the doorway of his cabin as the sisters took positions behind the corral. Moving with the silent precision of trained warriors despite their exhaustion, the horses snorted nervously, sensing what the human heart often tries to deny. Then it came, the distant crunch of boots on gravel, the faint jingle of metal, the quiet, deliberate movement of men who approached death with confidence. Ethan saw them first. 6 shadowy figures sliding out of the darkness like snakes, their faces hidden behind bandanas, their rifles already drawn. "Evening, rancher," the leader called out, with a cruel smile that Ethan could hear in his voice even from across the yard. "We're looking for 2 Apache girls. Big ones, mean ones. Heard they passed through these parts." Ethan swallowed the urge to raise his gun immediately. 6 men, armed and ruthless, could kill him before he blinked. Instead, he stepped forward with the calm of a man who had nothing left to lose. "You should keep riding," he said. "There's no one here for you." The men laughed, slow and mocking. "We ain't stupid," the leader said. "Tracks don't lie. If the girls are here, step aside. If you're defending them, well, that's a mistake, cowboy." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't take advice from men who hunt. Women." The silence that followed was electric. One of the bounty hunters lifted his rifle, preparing to fire, when suddenly an arrow struck the ground between his boots. Quivering upright, the men spun around. Behind them, emerging from the shadows like ghosts of the earth itself, stood a line of Apache warriors, silent, unmoving, deadly. Not 700 this time, but maybe 40. 40 warriors who moved with the presence of an army. The leader cursed under his breath. "Damn Apaches. How the hell?" But before he could finish, the older sister stepped out slowly, towering like a living mountain, her eyes blazing with ancestral fire. "You chased us across sacred land," she said. "You hunted what you did not understand. Now the land answers." The younger sister stepped beside her, drawing a long ceremonial blade from her belt. "Run," she said softly. "While you still can." The bounty hunters shifted nervously. Even they could sense they were outmatched. But pride is a blind creature. The leader spat in the dirt. "We don't run." And so the fight began. It lasted less than a minute. When the leader raised his rifle, an Apache arrow struck his shoulder, spinning him around like a rag doll. Another hunter fired blindly and missed, only to be tackled by an Apache warrior who moved faster than thought. 2 more tried to flee, but the giant sisters intercepted them with terrifying grace. Grace, yet they didn't kill them. They only struck them hard enough to end the fight. Ethan fired one carefully aimed shot to disarm the last remaining threat, blowing the rifle clean out of a man's hands. When it was over, the bounty hunters lay groaning in the dust, alive but defeated. The war chief who had visited the day before rode into the yard just then, his horse snorting white steam into the cold night air. "You kept your word," he said to Ethan. "You stood with them." Ethan wiped the sweat and dust from his brow. "They deserve safety," he replied. The chief nodded slowly. "And for that, you have the respect of the Apache nation." He turned to his warriors. "Take these men away. Ban them from our lands." As the bounty hunters were dragged off into the dark, the chief looked back at Ethan one last time. "The land has watched," he said, "and it has judged you worthy." When dawn finally crept over the horizon, painting the sky in gentle gold, the ranch felt different, not threatened. Not lonely, but protected. The giant sisters approached Ethan, gratitude shining in their eyes. "You fought beside us," the younger sister said. "Few men have ever done that." The older sister placed a heavy, warm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "If ever your path crosses darkness," she said, "call to the wind. We will come." Then they rode off with their warriors, disappearing into the glowing horizon like living legends returning to the pages of history. Ethan stood alone again, but not truly alone. Not anymore. He looked at his ranch, at the sky, at the necklace around his neck, and he understood. The frontier had changed him, claimed him, marked him as one of its own. And as the camera fades for the viewers listening to this story, Ethan's steady voice carries one final message. If you want more stories like this, full of courage, loyalty, and the untamed spirit of the West, make sure you subscribe to the channel. The frontier is just getting started.